will Republicans decide between Trump or his remaining opponents? And how soon does that process start? Well, if you've been busy, having a little time off or enjoying your holiday food or your New Year's workout routine or any of the number of things that might make you lose track, we want to begin the hour with a very simple number. These primaries actually begin in just 13 days with the Iowa caucus, and that'll be the first time that Republican voters actually weigh in. Iowa's a state that Trump lost in his first go-round at all this. We have more on that in just a moment. And while some Trump opponents in the Republican Party see Nikki Haley as the best possible alternative left, her ads have been arguing that she could unite the party, that she is best positioned to defeat Biden, while also taking some shots at Ron DeSantis.
The support for Ron DeSantis plummeting.
Republican voters are just not that into DeSantis. Ron DeSantis consistently trails.
The Biden team is worried that if Nikki Haley gets that nomination, they could be in trouble.
Nikki Haley polls 17 points higher than Joe Biden.
Now, that emphasis on DeSantis shows that even with momentum, Haley hasn't overtaken DeSantis in Iowa, as Politico puts it. She's clearly also pulling punches against Donald Trump himself. And while deferring to Trump has become a kind of a common thing among Republican candidates, I bet you've noticed it if you track the race or the debates, it has not been shown to be a winning strategy in these primaries. Consider that the candidate who actually came closest to stopping Trump in the last Republican primaries and who beat him in Iowa was one of the harshest Trump attack dogs at the time. Senator Cruz came into Iowa swinging, and he kept hitting and hitting Trump hard throughout that primary season.
We are projecting that when it's all said and done, based on all available numbers, Ted Cruz is your projected winner of the Iowa First in the Nation caucuses.
Cruz stayed on the attack. He rose through the final weeks in that home stretch. In January 2016, well, the final poll did, as mentioned, have Trump in the lead, with Cruz right behind him. Now, if you put too much stock in polls, you might have thought Trump would win Iowa. That's how many Beltway politicos viewed the polling, but the Iowa caucus is notoriously about Iowa, not about polls or Beltway predictions. Now, I'm going to mention my control room. We showed the Brian Williams. We may have a different shot here of Ted Cruz. If we have that, let's take a look.
I recognize that Donald is dismayed that his poll numbers are falling in Iowa.
We ought to have someone who isn't springing out of bed to tweet.
I'm going to tell you what I really think of Donald Trump. This man is a pathological liar. Donald Trump is a serial philanderer, and he boasts about it. This is not a secret. He's proud of being a serial philanderer.
That's how Ted Cruz was talking. Imagine if Trump had been indicted once or 4 times, whether he would have mentioned it. The point here, the reason why we showed you, is the polls had Cruz trailing. Cruz was on the attack in a very clear, direct, and repeated way, going after Donald Trump for all the things that people knew about Donald Trump, for all the reasons that he's unpopular, for all the reasons that voters have held back, and there's never been a plurality of people who've picked Trump over the alternative. He lost the total vote both times he ran, and as you saw there, he lost to Cruz in Iowa even after seeming to lead in some of the polls. So the Ted Cruz strategy was go after Trump. Now, how did Trump respond in Iowa? Well, in a way that has proven oh so familiar. Trump was the loser of that Iowa caucus, and he accused fellow Republicans, including Cruz, of fraud. Now, it's easy to forget now that so many people in the Republican Party view Trump as their next inevitable nominee. We're showing you this night as context. Iowa boosted Cruz to go on to win 10 more states. It was the runner-up to Trump in that primary. In a less fractured field, he might have stopped Trump entirely. That may be why today's candidates are spending over $100 million in Iowa alone to get their message out in an environment where Trump this cycle has effectively reduced interest by basically making these debates less popular, less viewed, less rated. That's how he'd put it, because as you see on your screen, last time he was there and people tuned in, and this time he has skipped them. I could tell you tonight the last debate before this Iowa caucus is scheduled for January 10th, next Wednesday, but Trump won't be there, and he's counter-programming it by going on Fox News in his own town hall that night, which means, unlike last cycle, many Iowa Republicans will be watching Donald Trump solo at that critical hour instead of the rivals, the potential competition that same night. And as for the Cruz lessons, well, Trump's current rivals, most of them are not attacking him like Cruz did. They seem to fear either, one, they will alienate the soft Trump support they need if they attack Trump, or two, they'll alienate Trump as a potential future president that they want to work with. Now, the first option is possible. That's the political strategy. The second, I can tell you, is absurd. Trump has reunited with former critics like Ted Cruz himself or the now Senator J.D. Vance. Vance, by the way, became famous because he wrote an anti-Trump book. Now they party together. And Cruz parties with Trump. If you followed this at all, you know Trump is about what you can do for him now, not what you said in the past. One candidate who is attacking Trump these days in the Republican Party is Chris Christie, leaning into the elephant in the room about the biggest elephant in the room politically, which is Trump's looming criminal trials, which could make him a literal felon before Election Day. Now, within the Republican primary, we follow the evidence. There are a few signs that the legal problems are what's going to stop Trump, and certainly not stopping him if other candidates can't even talk about it and make it an issue. But in the rest of the nation, back on planet Earth, in reality, there are ample signs that a conviction would further wound a candidate who already lost to Biden in 2020 by 7 million votes. You take it all together, and the history may not be a prologue. The history may be sort of a flashback to a time when people, whatever you think of Ted Cruz, people thought that if you want to stop a front runner, you have to be willing to attack the front runner. Now we're in this upside-down world where, like I mentioned, they spent 100M barely pointing out the front runner's alleged or possible shortcomings.